Let's fill out a 2024 U.S. Senate map based on the latest poll taken in all 34 contested races. For Donald Trump or Joe Biden to get anything done in either of their potential second terms in the White House, they will need party control of the Senate. Democrats have held a majority in the upper chamber since 2020, but Republicans have a strong fundamental advantage on the 2024 map. Democrats must defend 23 of the 34 Senate seats up for election this November, including 8 of the 10 most competitive races, and 3 seats in states that Trump won in both 2016 and 2020. Those are Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia. Needless to say, the 2024 Senate map is extremely favorable for the Republican Party. The question is, can they get the job done in the key races? Let's get started over here in the reliable Democratic stronghold of Washington, and then proceed to work our way across the rest of the country. In Washington, the latest poll conducted by Echelon Insights in mid-March, sponsored by a Republican interest group, shows incumbent Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell leading her likely Republican opponent, Raul Garcia, by 8 points among 600 registered voters. This is a likely Democrat margin in Washington, and a much tighter margin than in 2018 when Cantwell won election to a fourth term by 17 points. Keep in mind, though, that no Republican has won a Senate race in Washington since 1994. Moving down to California, incumbent Democrat Dianne Feinstein passed away last October, and Congressman Adam Schiff is heavily favored to succeed her this November, as California is a strongly Democratic state. The latest Senate survey conducted by the Public Policy Institute of California had Schiff leading his Republican opponent Steve Garvey by 24 points. Garvey is a former LA Dodger and came just 3,000 votes shy of Schiff in the multi-partisan primary election held on Super Tuesday, though he and the other Republican candidates in the race combined for only 38% of the votes in the primary, compared to Democrats' 60%. California goes safe blue. As does the Aloha State, Hawaii, no polls yet here, but the incumbent Democrat Brian Schatz is the most popular senator in the country, and Hawaii is a deep blue state. Over in Nevada, we have a competitive race here between incumbent Democrat Jackie Rosen and her likely Republican opponent, U.S. Army veteran Sam Brown. Rosen was first elected in 2018 by 5% over then Republican Senator Dean Heller, and Nevada is considered a purple state at the statewide level, as both of the last 2 presidential contests went to Democrats by less than 2.5 points, while Republicans flipped the governor's office in 2022. The latest survey released by the New York Times and Siena College earlier this month had Rosen leading by 2 points among 614 registered voters. That's a tilt Democrat margin. Then, over in Utah, incumbent Senator Mitt Romney is retiring, and Congressman John Curtis is both the heavy favorite to win the Republican nomination as well as the general election in November. There have not yet been any polls assessing the head-to-head contest between Curtis and his presumptive Democratic opponent, Caroline Gleich, but we can assume that Utah will be a safe Republican state, as no Democrat has won a Senate race here since 1970. Down in Arizona, a key battleground in the presidential race, and the Senate contest is also highly competitive. Incumbent Senator Kyrsten Sinema is an independent who caucuses with the Democrats, but she opted against running for re-election. This means that the 2024 contest will be a head-to-head race between the likely Democratic nominee, Congressman Ruben Gallego, and the likely Republican nominee, Kari Lake, who lost the 2022 gubernatorial election in Arizona by less than a point. Now, Arizona was, for a long time, a Republican stronghold, though Democrats have now won the last 5 major statewide races in Arizona for president, Senate, and governor. The latest poll here by the New York Times and Siena College, again, has Gallego leading by 4 points, which is roughly in line with most other surveys showing Gallego with a slight advantage. This one in particular translates to a lean Democrat margin on the map. I think it's also worth noting that Donald Trump led Joe Biden by 7 points among the same sample of respondents in that same New York Times survey, suggesting that Gallego is running well ahead of the incumbent Democratic president. Let's head over to New Mexico now, a moderately blue state that went to Biden by 10 points in 2020. Incumbent Senator Martin Heinrich was reelected for the first time in 2018 by 24 points in a three-candidate race. Unfortunately, we do not yet have any polls here for the 2024 race between Heinrich and his presumptive Republican opponents, Nella Domenici, but given that Heinrich is a strong incumbent and Biden is expected to win New Mexico by a comfortable margin, we can place it down as safe Democrat for now. Finishing up the Southwest region, let's go to Texas. Incumbent Senator Ted Cruz is, for better or for worse, one of the most well-known senators in the country. You either love him or you hate him. He's running for a third term after coming surprisingly close to losing in 2018 against popular Democrat Beto O'Rourke. Cruz won by only 2.6%, the closest Senate contest here since 1978. Now, he should have less of a problem this November against Democratic nominee Congressman Colin Allred, thanks to the fact that Trump should win Texas by at least 5 points at the top of the ticket. The latest poll here, released by the Texas Politics Project in mid-April, had Cruz up 13 points over Allred among 1,200 registered voters. That's a safe Republican margin, larger than most surveys, but alas, this map is entirely based on the most recent survey. Up in Wyoming now, Trump's best state in 2020, we really don't actually need to get into it. Incumbent Republican John Barrasso will win re-election by a very, very wide margin. I'm not even sure if there's a Democratic candidate in the race right now. In Montana, on the other hand, we have a very closely watched contest between incumbent Democratic Senator Jon Tester and his likely Republican opponent Tim Sheehy, a Navy SEAL turned aerospace CEO with the backing of Trump and pretty much every other notable GOP politician. Now, Tester has managed to win re-election twice in Ruby Red, Montana, thanks to his unique ability to remain among the most popular senators in the country, which is especially remarkable considering that he's never really caused the Democratic Party any policy or voting headaches like Joe Manchin has in West Virginia. He still is facing an uphill battle, though, to secure a fourth term in a state that Trump will most probably win by around 16 percentage points. The latest survey, released by JL Partners in late March, had Sheehy leading Tester by 3 points, 48% to 45%, among 503 likely voters. Now, Sheehy is a relatively strong Republican recruit, at least compared to many of the GOP's nominees in 2022, and that makes things even more difficult for Tester as we place Montana down as lean Republican. As for North Dakota and Nebraska, where they are holding both a regular and special election, both states are strongly red at the presidential level, with Republican incumbents running for re-election. The only polls I've seen across either state were internals on behalf of the independent candidate, challenging incumbent Deb Fischer in the regular election in Nebraska. They both showed Dan Osborne ahead of or within striking distance of Fischer, but I'm not just going to buy into those as anything other than campaign fodder. Both Senate races in Nebraska will be safe Republican, as will North Dakota. Over in Minnesota, incumbent Democrat Amy Klobuchar is a powerhouse within the state. She won her previous 3 Senate elections, each by more than 20 points, and even as the presidential race may be competitive, there's no reason to think that Klobuchar will be in any trouble in 2024. The latest survey by Survey USA on behalf of a local TV station in Minnesota from early April has her leading by 17 points, and so it will go down as safe Democrat here. And moving down to Missouri, incumbent Republican Josh Hawley flipped this seat from blue to red in 2018, winning by only 6% in that election. It's not going to be as competitive here in 2024 as Hawley runs for re-election as the incumbent senator now. The most recent poll, taken by Remington Research in early March, had Hawley leading by 14 points among 713 likely voters. I do expect him to win by at least this much this November. Missouri is solid R. Let's also quickly label Tennessee and Mississippi as safe Republican as well here in the South. Republican incumbent Senator Marsha Blackburn leads her likely Democratic opponent Gloria Johnson in Tennessee by 16 points, according to this Targos research poll from March and into April. 955 likely voters in this survey. Blackburn is probably going to win by a much wider margin, as Trump did carry Tennessee by 33 points in 2020. Meanwhile, there are no available polls in Mississippi, but it's also a very solid Republican state. Now, while we're over here, let's do Florida as well, where Republican incumbent Rick Scott was elected by only around 11,000 votes out of more than 8 million cast in 2018. He defeated then-incumbent Democrat Bill Nelson by 0.13% of the votes. I do expect Scott to win re-election by a much more comfortable margin this time around, as Florida has shifted hard right since 2018, and his likely Democratic opponent, former Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, is a historical underperformer. Now, this latest survey, released just last week by CBS News and YouGov, has Scott leading by 8 points among more than 1,000 likely voters. This is probably going to be very close to Scott's final margin when all of the votes are counted this November. Florida goes likely Republican. That leaves us with the Midwest and Northeast regions. Before we get to the numerous competitive races in the Midwest, let's go ahead and knock off all of the safe blue states here in this Democratic-dominated region, including Virginia, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maine. The only states we have polls in so far this cycle here are Virginia, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, where all three have the Democratic candidate in front by at least 10 points. Incumbent Virginia Senator Tim Kaine leads his likely Republican opponent, Hung Cao, in Virginia by 12 points, according to this Fabrizio Ward survey. Now, you may remember Kaine as Hillary Clinton's running mate in 2016. He was reelected to a second term in 2018 by 16 points. Then in New Jersey, likely Democratic nominee Congressman Andy Kim leads Republican primary favorite Christine Serrano Glasner by 10 points, according to this survey by Farley Dickinson University. Now, interestingly, this poll also surveyed how Kim fared against other potential Republican nominees, and this was Kim's widest lead. And then finally, up in Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, to no one's surprise, leads a generic Republican candidate by 20 points in this survey by Suffolk University. Warren was reelected by 23 points in 2018, and Massachusetts was Biden plus 33 in 2020. So that leaves us with 7 states here in the Mid-Atlantic region and across the Midwest, all but one of which are interesting. Let's go ahead and get Indiana out of the way first. Incumbent Republican Senator Mike Braun is running for governor, and Congressman Jim Banks won the Republican primary earlier this month. Banks should have little problem in the general election against Democrat Valerie McRae in this Trump plus 17 state, although the only survey we have here is from Emerson College, all the way back in October of last year, that had 47% of respondents saying other or undecided, and Banks leads McCrary by only 9 points. I am, though, going to give Banks the benefit of the doubt here and assume that if this sample were asked today, he would lead by more than 10 points. Let's place Indiana as safe Republican. Alrighty, from there, let's head to Wisconsin. Democrat Tammy Baldwin is running for a third term after she was reelected by 11 points in 2018. Wisconsin is a highly competitive state at the presidential level, which is likely to help out her Republican opponent here in a presidential year. Right now, it appears highly likely that she will face bank owner Eric Hovde. In the latest survey by the New York Times and Siena College, is Baldwin leading Hovde by 7 points, 49% to 42%, among 614 likely voters. Notably, again, as was the case in Arizona, Baldwin is running far ahead of Joe Biden, who trailed Trump by a point in this same sample of likely voters, surveyed by the New York Times. Wisconsin will join Arizona as leans Democrat here on the Senate map. Now, these are two absolute must-holds for the party. The same can be said for the race in Michigan, where incumbent Democrat Debbie Stabenow is retiring, leaving Democrats more vulnerable than they would have been had Stabenow sought a 5th term in office. This will be the first open race for this seat since 1994, which was also the only time since 1972 that Republicans won a Michigan U.S. Senate race. Like Wisconsin, Michigan is another key presidential battleground expected to be decided by a very narrow margin between Biden and Trump. The question again is how likely Democratic nominee Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin will perform in relation to Biden against likely Republican nominee Mike Rogers, a former congressman himself who, like Sheehy in Montana, is another solid recruit for the GOP with an electable profile. The most recent poll conducted by Emerson College between April 25th through 29th has Slotkin leading by 2 points, or 1.8% to be exact, among 1,000 registered voters. Slotkin is a historical overperformer in her own U.S. Senate races, and she received the support of 41.6% in this poll over Rogers's 39.8%, with a lot of undecideds. Yet again, this is another example of Democratic Senate candidates outperforming Biden, as this same Emerson College survey had Trump leading by about a point in Michigan. Nevertheless, the Senate race goes down as tilting Democrat here. In Ohio, incumbent Democrat Sherrod Brown is seeking a fourth term in office against car dealer Bernie Moreno. Brown, like Tester in Montana, has managed to remain in office in a Republican-leaning state due to his broad appeal among his constituents. He won re-election by 8 points in 2018, though Ohio has continued to shift right since that election. Donald Trump carried Ohio by 8 points in 2020, and then Republican Senate candidate J.D. Vance defeated Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan by 6 points in 2022. Ryan was considered by many to be the perfect candidate for Democrats in that race. And now here in 2024, Moreno was viewed by most analysts and campaign operatives as Republicans' weakest general election candidate against Brown among the Republican primary candidates, but he still managed to secure the nomination easily thanks to the endorsement of Trump. Surprisingly, no new polls have been surveyed since the Republican primary. We have to go all the way back to March 11th for this survey by East Carolina University that had Brown up by 4 points among 1,300 likely voters. That is another lean Democrat margin in Ohio. This would be a massive result for the party, but even if Brown's lead does hold steady, which I would say is 50-50 at best, if Montana flips Republican, the GOP will still secure a majority with at least 51 seats as the state of West Virginia goes solid R. Democratic incumbent Joe Manchin is retiring, effectively wrapping up one of the easiest GOP flips in election history. West Virginia was Donald Trump's second best state in 2020 at R+39, and popular sitting governor Jim Justice is the Republican nominee for Senate this time around. There have not yet been any polls assessing the contest between him and Democratic nominee Glenn Elliott just yet, but Justice was already leading Manchin by safe Republican margins in most hypothetical surveys before the incumbent Democrats stepped aside. In Pennsylvania, incumbent Democratic Senator Bob Casey Jr. is an electoral powerhouse in the Keystone State. He has won 6 straight statewide elections by at least 9 points. So while Pennsylvania is highly competitive at the presidential level, Democrats have to feel pretty good in Casey's ability to retain this Senate seat against Republican nominee David McCormick. The latest survey by the New York Times and Siena College, again, has the Democrat leading by 5 points among over 1,000 registered voters. McCormick is not a bad candidate per se, but Casey is one of the strongest incumbents in the nation. Pennsylvania goes lean Dem. Finally, let's wrap things up in Maryland, which would have normally gone safe blue without much thought if it weren't for former Republican Governor Larry Hogan winning the Republican nomination for Senate. Hogan left office as one of the most popular governors in the entire country, with an approval rating near 80%, and he managed to win 2 elections as a Republican in one of the deepest blue states in the nation. Biden carried Maryland by nearly 34 points in 2020, and should again carry it by at least 30 points this November. That, of course, makes it extremely difficult to imagine Hogan actually pulling off the upsets this November, though it will probably be decided by a much narrower margin than it otherwise would have been. The latest survey from Public Policy Polling, released earlier this month, has Democratic nominee Angela Alsobrooks leading Hogan by 9 points among 719 likely voters, 46% to 37%, a likely Democrat margin. So that does it for this edition of the 2024 U.S. Senate map, based on the most recent survey taken in every contest. Republicans are projected to flip the majority with 51 seats over Democrats' 49. Feel free to let me know your thoughts on this map, the state of play in 2024 more broadly, or anything else really that you want to leave as a comment in the comment section below. Also make sure to let me know down there what other 2024 related videos you would like to see in the future. Shout out to my channel members on screen here. Thank you so much for your support. If you would like to become a member, go ahead and click the join button below this video to receive exclusive perks. Make sure to subscribe to my channel down below as well, and please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. You can check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.